So I'd like to tell you about my journey into React Native development. I would say I'm more coming from a background of doing web development for some years and just applying this knowledge into doing mobile development with React Native. Yes, a bit of introduction. I'm Kenneth, full-stack developer, having fun with React since around 2015. I started on React at Issue. It was mostly or only on web back then. And then here at the Innovation Lab, we've been doing React Native for around 3 years, and I've been part of the journey for 2.5 years. We built around 5 multi-platform apps using React Native, and a lot of them focusing on taking high-quality images of skin. Actually, all of them. So just, who are you? How many have done an app in React Native? Quite a lot. Anyone completely new to React?
At least one over there.
Nice. Cool. Actually, quite a lot doing React Native already. So some of it might be too introductory, but let's see. So I guess like the topic we're exploring here today started something like this. Like imagine you could just code your mobile app once and then run it on multiple platforms. And there's been several solutions to this, and several not that successful. One of the maybe more successful is React Native, also released in 2015. Has this, if we start by just looking at the architecture of a regular like single platform app, where you would have like an Android SDK, an iOS SDK, and then you write your application code on top of this. And you have some advantages like the tooling support is great, right? You have maybe Xcode or Android Studio, which is well supported, and you get all the latest features first. But of course, there's some downsides that you need to write your applications several times. And then React Native has this abstraction on top of these different kinds, also Windows, some glue code in between, and then you write your code in something that transpiles to JavaScript. So it opens up mobile development to developers that might not be familiar with mobile development. Yeah, that's pretty cool. There's of course also some different options for doing this, cross-platform frameworks with a native look and feel. Xamarin, if you're into C#. Flutter, also quite interesting, a bit different architecture where the whole rendering stack is re-implemented, where the other platforms are actually using all of the native animations and primitives that you get on different platforms. And of course, you can do a lot with progressive web apps, especially on Android. So that's like final disclaimer. But let's get going. So first thing is like, where do we actually start if we want to do some React Native? So 3 years ago, Expo wasn't really ready for what we were doing here. But I think right now it's an excellent way to get started into to React Native. So start there. It looks something like this. There's a CLI. You say, hey, I want to start a new project. I want to build a native app. You wait a bit. And then you end up with a project that looks like fairly familiar. I would say there's some JavaScript, there's some screens, there's some components, React components, and pretty important, like a package.json that is fairly simple, where some of the things are abstracted away. You do an npm start, you get a browser running where you have like logging. You're able to run an like press and then a simulator starts, scan a QR code with your mobile phone, running the Expo app, and then you have a working environment without Xcode or Android Studio. That's pretty nice. And you're an app developer now. That's pretty cool. And it even documents how to deploy, which is tricky. Let's get more into that later. But you cannot use Expo, and correct me if I'm wrong, Sam, but there are some, like, Expo ships with an SDK by itself, including, for example, a camera library, but there might be native modules here that that are not supported. For example, we have our own library for doing like skin capture, and that might be running some machine learning models on top of that. So that's one of the reasons why we're not using Expo. But yeah, if you have some specific requirements, it might not be the right place, but it's a really good place to start. So far it looks pretty easy. So let's see some code. And it also looks pretty familiar. Like it's React. There's no divs and text and stuff, or there's no divs and spans and p tags. Everything you import, text and views. It's good. And the styling you do here is actually pretty nice with like flex layout, fairly familiar and a great abstraction for building UIs, I think, and nothing cascades, which is nice if you're used to web. And there's also hot reloading. Where's Andreas? Yay, hot pink. Yeah, we have a designer on the team, coder, that likes hot pink. This is for him. But hot reloading is actually super nice. Like we're used to it when working on web, but on mobile it's not that often that you get this super nice, quick developer experience of actually changing something and then you see it. So I think that's important. So we get a bit further into the woods, and we realize that mobile development isn't like web. There's some key differences that I realized when starting on this, and one of them is like navigation is completely different. So on mobile, or not mobile, but on web, like we know that there's like a stack. You can move forward, you can go back. That's basically it. You can replace parts of it, but it's basically a stack. And on mobile, you have multiple stacks, and you can navigate between these stacks. And for example, in a tab-based navigation, where you have multiple tabs on the bottom, then each of them will keep their own state of where you actually are. And sometimes you open the modal, and there's a nice animation that like goes up on iOS. That's like more of a modal kind of thing. And sometimes you go left and right, and all of this needs to match. And so there's some things there both to design for, but also to code. And then of course there's like the native feel, and that's really important. It's what makes mobile apps their identity, right? That you, for example, know the material UI ripple effect on Android buttons, or the smooth momentum scrolling on iOS, or left to right swiping gestures that actually differs on the two platforms. So all of these things users are very used to and know how to navigate, and you need to adhere to all of these, or try to at least. Of course, there are different cases, like exceptions, where, for example, Gmail on iOS follows the material design guidelines, which is you would usually use for Android apps, and the other way around, where the Android app on the right actually more follows Apple Human Interface guidelines. So there are exceptions, but this is stuff you need to get into. It gets dark. Actually, mobile development is just a different beast. It might feel familiar, but it is a different beast. And one thing we realized that you might still need native development or developers with knowledge around iOS and Android for building interesting features. And of course, you can build interesting apps without this, but for us, at least for running like things on a live camera feed and stuff like that, it might be, we at least needed our native developers for this. And then you say, like, why can't you just use third-party dependencies for some of this? And you can for a lot of it, but we also realized that a lot of them might not be maintained by experienced native developers, which is fine, but it's like maybe maintained by somebody like me that haven't done Objective-C for a while or something like that. So, and then deployment, mostly on iOS, like it's just painful. The App Store reviews takes a while. There's a lot of manual steps. We're using Fastlane, which I can only recommend to relieve some of these pains, and you can actually get a CI setup that's pretty nice with Fastlane. But compared to web, where you just push something out and it's out there. And so you spend a lot of time building an app and you're super happy and you release the next version of your app, and then you realize that users might not ever update to that version. And that's also a radical change from web, where you can just push it out, and when people refresh, then they have the latest version. So that's something you really need to also, like the code you put out there might not ever be updated. So it's good that it works. So what we do here, some recommendations that we try to do is like focus on code quality and tests, because you might not be able to change that if people don't update their app, or at least it can be painful if you mess something up on a phone and it has, like we have some apps with offline first support where there's a database on the phone, and if you mess something up in that database, like you need to migrate it in the next version. So there's all kinds of things there. And then like for backend changes, if you're using some backend API, like just avoid breaking changes there, because yeah, people might not update the app to adhere to the latest version of the API. And then finally, like have a dedicated, like we don't have that, but I would really recommend that have a dedicated mobile endpoints in your API that is only used by mobile, and that you know if you change something, then yeah, so stuff don't break. And finally, also something we don't really have, but we've tried it in some apps, but it makes sense to implement some prompt on notch screen for your users to inform them about they need to update the app to continue to use it. It doesn't really adhere to some of Apple guidelines, but we tried it for a few of our apps, and we're really happy about it. And it's kind of a chicken and egg thing, right? If you don't have this prompt screen in the first version of your app, all the users on the first version will never see it. You will never be able to show it. So might be a good thing to start with, just having a notch screen. Like we made an API call on S3 checking a file, and if the file was there and it said, hey, the user needs to update, then it would show the updated screen, depending on the version you were on. So I hope I didn't scare you off, but sometimes you just want to pack your suitcases and return home to good old web. But let's look a bit back. I tried to concise a few learnings. When starting on this talk, I had like a bunch of things I wanted to tell you and takeaways, but try to condense it a bit. One of them, how many use Storybook? Maybe on web or on mobile? Quite a lot. Nice. Yeah, we love Storybook, and it's maybe even nicer on mobile, where it can be a bit hard to get into a specific screen. You don't have a URL, you cannot just go in there. So actually, we use it to document all the screens we have in most of the projects, some of the components, but also just documenting what can you do on the screen, like what are all the error states and all of that. And then, like whenever you need to fix something, if it's in the UI, then just boot Storybook up and fix it there. And actually, when fixing like responsive issues, when you need to check that it works on an iPad or a small phone or an Android of a specific size, then you just boot up a bunch of emulators, or connect different phones, and then all of them will be updated whenever you change the code. That's super nice. So I really like that. And then types. If you're into types, so React Native is written in Flow, so we actually just started by using Flow. I also used it before, and I really liked it, but we actually recently, maybe half a year ago, transitioned or moved the entire thing to Typescript due to the better developer tooling. Like just VS Code support for Typescript is amazing compared to Flow, I would say. So just that is super nice, and the feature parity is more or less the same, and the migration wasn't that bad actually. So yeah, I can only recommend that. So choosing a navigation library, the ones that work with React Native knows that there's quite a lot, and there's been many options in the past. It seems like the community have aligned around 2 libraries, at least if you do TypeScript, Flow, JavaScript. There's the React Native navigation that we actually started by using. We migrated an existing app, 2 apps actually, one Android and one iOS, to a React Native app. So we actually wanted like the really native feel of animations and stuff like that. So that's React Native navigation. And then we actually moved to React navigation, which a bit like Flutter, reverse engineered the look and feel of how animations actually works on the different platform. So when the iPhone X came out, there was quite some work that needs to be done there compared to if it was just a regular Xcode project. Some promotion for my Twitter account, which I don't really use that much. I should do more. Follow me, and we can write to each other. But yeah, so we moved to React navigation. We had a lot of Android issues with React Native navigation, and the non-declarative API in the second version of the API and stuff like that. We're not super happy about. So can only recommend React navigation. And the part about focusing on the code quality and tests, we tried both Appium. We actually started out by using Appium because the idea of, so this is for automated end-to-end tests where you click around, or where you write some tests that will click around in your UI. We started by using Appium because the idea of being able to run this on Amazon's device farm, where you can just say, hey, I want to test this on all these different apps and versions, and that was super nice. We didn't use it that much. It wasn't that stable. And then we started just using a simulator on CI. Yeah. So at the end of the day, right now there's some projects using Detox, which we're really happy about. So more of a gray box testing where there's actually something embedded on or running on the device. So similar to Cypress, if you know that from web. It's been working pretty well. So I have an interesting solution. I thought it was interesting. You can judge. But I wanted to share this thing where we were working on a feature building an editorial content section. So like different tips on various stuff, and we would like that non-coders could actually update all of these all this content, like new images, new text, add a new article, stuff like that, and possibly remote over an API. But enforce like some design consistency. We didn't just want to use a web view. Like if this was a website, it would be quite easy. But we wanted so we actually wanted something like Markdown. So people could just write some Markdown, and then that would be translated into native views. That would be nice. And somebody made it, of course. React. There's a bunch. We use this one, React Native Markdown view. Which maps Markdown to native views. So you write some Markdown, and then you define how the styling should look for a heading or for an image and stuff like that. So we ended up having something like this, where it's just Markdown. There's a heading, there's an image, there's a quote, and then it looks something like this in the app, which is like everything is native still. So I thought that was a pretty nice solution and really easy to implement. Upgrading, at least I cannot speak for an Expo project, but at least for a non-Expo project, React Native can be pretty painful to upgrade. So whenever there's a new version, there's usually a new version every month, then it can be painful. There's a bunch of CLI tools that I never really enjoyed using. I think maybe because we have quite a lot of configurations in our iOS part and Android part of our project, so just using the CLI tools didn't really work. But something that worked nicely was like more manual. It's called rndiff. It's a repository on GitHub where you basically, it's just a diff. So they commit every time there's a new version of React Native released. And then, for example, here's between 53 and 55. So that's the changes you need to do. And then you can manually change all the things. And that worked well for us because we had a lot of manual changes already that we needed to do. So made it a bit easier. And if you had some tests, then you could actually test it, or it worked. And for stability reasons and less frustrations, we just try to always stay one version behind, so don't go for the newest version because there's always a bunch of patch releases that comes after a few weeks. So it's super nice if you want the latest version and you help the community find all of these bugs, but if you want stability, then maybe just wait a month. But still, like try to keep up, because it gets even more painful when you're far behind. And suddenly, for this presentation, I haven't been working on React Native for a few months now. I've been working on web, which was nice. But I just wanted to take some screenshots for this. And of course, it didn't work because the app was outdated, and then Xcode made some changes, and the React Native CLI needed to update. And so it's fun. But this helps. Yeah, so as I talked about, one of the projects that I worked on started out as a native iOS and Android app. And after proving this product idea, we decided to move it to React Native to be able to write the code base once and use our more senior native developers to do more interesting features with machine learning or improving our camera library. And so one of the challenges we had here was like migrating like existing features, specifically like animation-heavy features from our old code base, React Native, old native iOS and Android code base to the React Native app. Yeah, as I didn't get it up and running, this is like a very old example of something. Is just to have something here that is like quite animation-heavy, and we thought like we needed to port the existing version of this. On iOS, it was pretty smooth. We could actually just, the whole thing would be shown, like use the old Swift code and just place it in a view. But on Android, it was quite painful, how to integrate it and rather time-consuming. So we took one step back, and one learning here is that it might be difficult porting like existing very native views, but another learning was that it was actually surprisingly easy to implement in using React Native animations. So they were more powerful than we actually thought, and you can get a super nice, smooth feeling, especially if you offload, use the native driver, so it's not running all of this in JavaScript. So that was like a learning that it's actually really powerful, and you can do a lot of interesting stuff. So we're almost there. I just have one final point that you might forget. Maybe we forgot it when we actually moved to React Native for some of the projects, and that's like the human aspect here. The cool thing with React Native, in my opinion, is that it makes it really accessible to a lot of people, and to me, and to people coming with more of a JavaScript background or React background. I think that's super, super cool. But it's also less accessible for native developers, people that used to work in Swift or Kotlin or whatever, and might also be harder to hire for. So just something to keep in mind. And finally, if you didn't get any takeaways or learnings from this talk, then just remember like to update your mobile apps on your phone, because it'll make everyone really happy. Thanks.